any other point which is not allocatively efficient, if you were to produce less, you would have a smaller total surplus. If you were to produce more, well, now you're actually having some negative surplus on this side because the extra cost outweighs the extra benefit. So the best level of output for society to produce as a whole is where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Later on, we show how the marginal cost curve is the supply curve and the marginal benefit is the demand curve. So where demand meets supply is the allocative efficient point. So later we showed how the marginal cost curve is basically the supply curve and the marginal benefit curve is basically the demand curve. Where demand and supply meet is what we call a market. The market decides the market price and the market quantity. I know this is very easy for you now. With no interference in the market and assuming no external costs, no external benefits. So let's assume external costs and external benefits are zero. If we assume there are no external costs and no external benefits, then that is actually the marginal social cost and that is actually the marginal social benefit. And that point is allocatively efficient. We'll see what happens when we have external costs and external benefits. Now, the triangle on top is the consumer surplus. Why? Demand is what you're willing to pay, but you actually end up paying less. Supply is how producers are willing to sell, but they actually end up getting a higher price. So the triangle below represents producer surplus. The triangle above represents consumer surplus. With no externalities, either cost-wise or benefit-wise, the market produces the largest possible total surplus. If there are no externalities, without government intervention, the market actually gives society as a whole the largest possible total surplus, combination of consumer and producer. The government may interfere with this market. They might impose a price ceiling. If it is an effective price ceiling, it will be below the equilibrium market price. Why might the government impose a price ceiling? They might feel the product's price is too high, so the government interferes with the market. And what the government ends up actually doing is, the government is trying to enforce a legal maximum price, but the quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. Even though consumers are actually wanting more, producers are not actually willing to sell more. So what ends up happening is, that's what ends up being traded. The rest is just excess demand. So the government is trying to reduce the price, but actually what happens is they end up making consumers worse off because producers aren't willing to sell as much compared to the equilibrium price. So what ends up happening is the government actually ends up giving a smaller total surplus for society as a whole. We call the loss in total surplus we use the term dead weight loss. That used to be surplus for consumers and producers, but the government has stepped in, imposed the price ceiling, interfered with the market, and created a deadweight loss. There's a loss in total surplus. Again, we're assuming no external benefits, no external costs. So when the government interferes in a market which has no external benefits, no external costs, the government actually ends up creating deadweight losses. Later we'll see where there are external benefits and where there are external costs, the government may interfere and make it better. But if there are no external benefits and costs, government interference actually makes things worse. I'll quickly draw a price floor. A price floor is a legal minimum price, such as a minimum wage. The government might feel the equilibrium price is too low, so the government might decide they want to interfere with the market and make the legal minimum price higher. But what ends up happening is the quantity demanded is lower than the quantity supplied. So the quantity that ends up being traded is again the smaller value. So whether the government imposes a price floor or whether the government imposes a price ceiling, the quantity traded actually falls. Because consumers can only buy even though producers have produced that much, consumers are only demanding this quantity. So the quantity that's exchanged between the two parties is the smaller quantity. So again, we've managed to decrease total surplus. The loss in total surplus is called a deadweight loss. Another way the government may interfere, if there are no external benefits and external costs, government imposition of a tax can also create a deadweight loss. So just to remind ourselves, there are no external costs, there are no external benefits, so the supply curve is already the marginal social cost curve. The demand curve is already the marginal social benefit curve. Imposing a per unit tax will increase the marginal cost. So it will shift that cost curve upwards. Now the new equilibrium quantity is smaller than the initial quantity. Remember, this point was already allocatively efficient. The initial market equilibrium is allocatively efficient if there are no externalities. So by imposing a tax, by imposing a per unit tax, the government is actually forcing the market to not be efficient anymore. The government is pushing the quantity downwards and thus creating a deadweight loss. the market used to be efficient as there were no externalities. So here government intervention is creating deadweight losses. So please understand the difference between a tax that creates a deadweight loss when there are no externalities. In a second, we'll look at a tax might actually help eliminate deadweight losses if there are externalities. So three different ways where the government may intervene and create deadweight losses. It pushes the economy from what used to be efficient to now what is inefficient. Now, let's say we have an externality. Let's assume we have a positive external cost. If we have a positive external cost, the supply curve is actually the marginal private cost curve, and the demand curve will still be the marginal social benefit curve. There is an external cost, but the firm is ignoring it. The firm is ignoring the external cost. If we add the external cost to the marginal private cost, the marginal social cost would actually be much higher. Such as, let's say, the external cost of pollution on a third party. A factory might be creating pollution but not actually paying for it, so it's incurring an extra cost on a third party. So adding that external cost now lifts the marginal private cost to the marginal social cost. So this is actually what is efficient. The market is actually not efficient. So what the market is actually doing is going beyond the efficient point. The market is actually overproducing this product because the market is underestimating the cost. The private market is ignoring the external cost. They underestimate the cost, overproduce, and create a deadweight loss. The market is creating a deadweight loss in this case by producing beyond the efficient point. Here's an example where the government can step in and help eliminate the deadweight loss by imposing what we call a Pigovian tax. So if the government imposed a tax equal to the value of the external cost, it would internalize the cost for the firm and it would force the equilibrium to be efficient. So in the case of externalities, government intervention actually helps eliminate deadweight losses. The market is not efficient by itself. The market is ignoring the external cost. So the government imposes a tax. If the tax equals the external cost, it will force the firm to recognize that, shift it up to the marginal social cost curve, force the equilibrium to be efficient. So that there are cases where government intervention makes the market inefficient. There are cases where government intervention makes the market more efficient. In the case where the market ignores some sort of externalities. I won't draw the one for external benefit. Let's go on to something else now. So